everyone. Welcome to today's stream. My name is Shama, and I'm the production lead for Kuthban. And today we're going to be talking about ideation and storyboarding. So I'm going to start with a bit of a preface on what makes a good story, how stories are built specifically for games, and then I'm going to touch upon the context that we follow to create our backstory for our game. Um, and eventually we're going to move on to make a storyboard and sketch one together. So let's get started. So a little bit of some history. Storyboarding became popular in film production back in the 1930s thanks to the original storyboard artist Webb Smith, who worked for Walt Disney, and turned it into something of a cinematic art form and a typical standard practice. So I'm a double major in film and interactive media at NYU Abu so I guess throughout this talk, you're going to be getting a lot of like film explanations as to what goes into storyboarding, and I guess a lot of film lingo, which goes hand in hand with game development. So in this picture, you just see Walt Disney in front of the Pinocchio storyboard. Storyboarding is very, very like iterative in all visual practices. So whether you're making a game, whether you're making a film, whether you're making an animation, it will all typically start as a sketch. And you can sketch on paper, you can sketch on iPad, wherever your heart desires, as long as you're able to get your ideas onto paper and tell them narratively, almost sort of frame by frame. And you can condense the information you want in each frame as much as you want, as long as you can give it to someone and they'd be able to look at it and understand what's going on and understand the different characters and the different sections of your story. And even in games that aren't played narratively, you will always have a backstory of why the characters are there. So, for example, in Super Mario, I'm going to talk about this example to even more detailed extent, just because it's one of my personal favorite games, and I think it's a really good example on how you can start with this really narrative and descriptive story, and in your game, you're not going to really have that description in each like iteration or each format of your game, but it justifies how you have these characters, and it provides like a creative base to form your game on. So these are some storyboards from Super Mario Odyssey. I'm going to start with what makes a good story. So this is something that's taught in almost all of your English classes, and if you didn't pay attention then, pay attention now, because you need this not just for making games, but in your daily life. When you say something, you want it to be told in an interesting manner. So you want to always preface who your characters are, the setting, the plot, the conflict resolution. These are typically the pillars of a story. And depending on each other person, they're going to break down these pillars into more specific segments, such as in the image on the right, where you have a complex main character, transformation, an objective or desire. There's typically obstacles and there's tension. And if you're presenting things visually, there's imagery. Even descriptively, there's going to be imagery. There's emotion, and there's a hook, and there's treasure, whether that's metaphorical or literal, which is something the character seeks to reach to. Whether that is like some conclusion they come to philosophically, whether it's like as I just mentioned, a literal treasure, like in Pirates of the Caribbean, for example. The structure typically goes beginning, middle, climax, and end, or in other words, denouement. And you'll hear the word denouement pretty frequently because it's your resolution, and the resolution is how you wrap up the movie. And keep in mind, the story. And keep in mind, how you wrap up the story is just as important as how you start the story. Because if your story starts great, you set that standard for the rest of the story. So it always has to have some sort of gripping factor to it. And that's typically why films or books tend to like flop usually, because they either have like an amazing ending or a bad beginning. When you have an amazing ending, you're not going to have this introduction to the story that grips you and makes you want to read more. So then you start. So then you stop halfway through the book or the film and you throw it away and you're like, I wasn't fascinated. That did not grab my attention. Um, so you always want to make sure you're consistent with the level at which you tell your story, and it should have its own wow factor at each stage. Focusing more on characters. When you're making a character, the boundaries right now the with Marvel and DC and all these different universes are very fluid. So you can make your character like be something completely new to the imagination. They're not human, they're not alien, they're not even a superhero, they're something else. There's some new thing you came up with. But typically, even with this new thing, there's a sort of reference of age, like a time span of how old they are, or um, even if that's not there, there's a time span of the audience um, that they're directing towards, which is who are you making this for? Who's your audience? What age group is the audience in for the character? What gender are they? And that could be very fluid as well. And are they human, animal, alien? I put etc. there because it's way too much to list, but they could be anything. But you want to have these parameters eventually defined so you can be able to tell your story in a way that makes sense, in a structured way. Because if you have, let's say, character A that lives in one universe and character B that lives in another universe, you need to eventually have a place in the story that connects these two characters and makes their connection point clear, and that then becomes a turning point of the story. What world do they live in? Yeah, that's just another point of which world they inhabit. Now, typically, this is how a typical story goes. It goes with the setup, the struggle, the finale. So these are essentially just different words that you're going to hear for these different parts of the story. So in the setup, you're going to typically hear the words introduction, inciting incident, or turning point. And then in the struggle, you're going to hear the words obstacle, midpoint, crisis. And in the finale, you're going to typically hear the words climax, denouement, or resolution. They all mean the same thing. They're just different ways to break up a story and tell each segment fluently, essentially. So getting into this, I'm going to show you one example of a cinematic intro where the story is quite literally tied to the game. So typically with lots of games, you'll see a cinematic intro. You can see that in games like God of War and Godfall. There's like a cinematic preview of the game that tells the story of the characters and why you're playing the game and the goal of the main character. And it's almost always like very, very, very cinematic, and there's a very strong analysis and breakdown of these different segments of a story where you can clearly tell what the climax is, you can clearly tell what their goal is, the resolution, and you can clearly tell how their story began, the introduction. So this is an example that I'm going to be showing you. One of many examples.
It was all a lie. Macros sold us a vision he never believed in.
pay attention here to how they introduce the story and the character. They're speaking about Macros, and for new players, you already start to get an idea of who Macros is.
We just didn't know it yet. We were warriors, but he turned us against each other. Brother against brother.
Just from that scene, you can already take away that it's
strategy.
You can already take away that it's essentially clan against clan. So through your visuals, you want to tell a story, and the dialogue is there to even give more information. So it kind of works hand in hand. You could quite literally watch this whole thing on mute and still understand the story. But the dialogue gives you more of a sort of incentive to want to truly immerse yourself within the game as a character.
Or him.
This rivalry is essentially what becomes your climax. And the resolution will be winning or losing. And that's set up very early on.
Macros was the better warrior that day.
And from the dialogue, you can tell that Macros is portrayed as the villain.
He left me for dead, but I survived. Macros thinks the war is over, but our fight has just begun.
So just from this introduction of this game, you can sort of have a connection to the characters that you're going to eventually be playing, and you're going to have more of an incentive to immerse yourself as as a character fighting against the villain, and it becomes one of the essential reasons as to why a user would want to play the game, because they want to become part of the story. So this is one way in which the narrative story is told quite literally and becomes the basis of the game. And you get to see that play out like as a cinematic intro. And then you have games such as Super Mario, where the story is not told quite literally within the game, but it's what formed the creative basis of the characters. So, for example, we have the Princess Toadstool, otherwise known as Princess Peach, of the Mushroom Kingdom. She's been kidnapped by the notorious King Koopa and the Toads of the Mushroom Kingdom, also known as Bowser. So she's been kidnapped by Bowser and she's held captive in the many castles of Bowser. So it's up to Mario and Luigi, two plumber brothers, to save the princess and defeat Bowser and his minions. And even in some iterations of the game where you're just playing through as Mario and you're just sort of going through the different mini worlds, this story is not like laid out to you, but you sort of understand from the reasoning of the game of wanting to move forward, of wanting to reach towards an end goal where you have Princess Peach standing at one of the eventual mini worlds. You can kind of connect the dots that, oh, this was the goal of the character all along, to get to the final boss, Bowser, and receive the prize, which becomes the literal treasure, Princess Peach. And of course, then within the game, the incentives are by collecting coins, or by getting power-ups, whatever it may be. There's still a narrative story that inspires what the power-ups are, that inspires what the treasure is. And that's sort of what makes the game so unique and so gripping, is that it's very meaningful in one way, yet it's very addictive in the way that you constantly keep playing, even though you know the story, you know what happens, and you know the end goal, you know the denouement. But the way the game is set up goes very fluently with the backstory, even though it's not directly shown to us. The same goes for even introducing new characters. So you see this happening with the Marvel universe as well. I'm going to continue using Super Mario as an example, just because the characters, I guess, have simpler backstories, let's say. So we have Princess Daisy, who's also known as the princess of Sarasaland. So she debuted in Super Mario Land after she was kidnapped by the evil alien Tatanga. So after he'd taken over the kingdom of Sarasaland, and wanted to marry her and make her his queen. However, she was eventually rescued by Mario. So this is sort of her backstory, and despite not knowing her backstory, it's what inspired the developers of the game to have her in newer iterations of the game. So in this slide, you see sort of old images of Princess Daisy in the comics and the evil villain Tatanga, and you see her new form, and her new form has still become one of the staple characters in Super Mario, and that's just another way how the story sort of develops and inspires the characters um, as true, I guess, staples of the world that you're playing in. Now, I'm gonna stop talking about Super Mario and bring this back to Kuthban. So Kuthban, our game, and that's based on the UAE. We start with the story, and today I'm gonna kind of give you like a little bit of a behind the scenes or insider information. So essentially, our first iteration of the game, we wanted to include a cinematic intro, and this cinematic intro was gonna sort of um, explain the connection between why you're racing in a desert and the story behind it. Our story behind it was to have this Emirati race car driver competing in some game, competition which is inspired by the Dakar races. So that's why I included this picture of the Dakar winners, Nasser Al Attiyah and Matthew Baumel, back in Abu Dhabi. And they're standing next to one of the rally race cars. So the reason we wanted to connect our story to the backdrop, we wanted to create this sort of character that is this Emirati race car driver, and they're racing through the rally in a UAE, and the rally that we created is inspired by our imagination, created by our imagination, inspired by reality. So we're including all elements that are in that sort of highlight the, I guess, uniqueness of the UAE, which is the different biomes we have: the skyscrapers, the deserts, the mosques, the old architecture near Dubai. We wanted to include all of those aspects and make it to be sort of this like highly imaginative rally track that is, I guess, hyper futuristic in a way. So we wanted to give the reason for why the user is playing as a racer in this game. And with a cinematic intro, we originally had this character that you see here on the left. This was going to be our first iterations of our race car driver, but eventually with our level designs, we decided to go with a different art style, but the story is still there. There's still a story of having our race car driver racing through this rally because it's our form of our competition, a Kuthban rally race. Now we're going to get into some storyboard sketching. So I want to show you the storyboard sketching process because by storyboarding your game, it's where you essentially take your groundbreaking gameplay ideas and reproduce them in a visual storytelling format. So it's super useful when your game design has lots of steps or focuses on a particular visual representation. So pretty quickly, you'll have a solid overview of your game design before you dive into production or prototyping. So from the production perspective, it's essentially cuts down cost and it streamlines the process of moving from ideation to design. And from the perspective of you being your story developer or your production crew, you'll spot potential gaps in your gameplay and storyline, and you can develop plot points to solve these issues, or you can even add some richness to the game. And that's what ended up happening with Kuthban. We originally started with multiple mini worlds that formed this overworld map, and one of the mini worlds was the rally races. And through our story, we realized that the richest story of this mini worlds was the rally race story. So just from that ideation process, we were able to quickly cut down the process of going through a whole prototype of all the mini worlds and just focus on that one, because we immediately cut that out as a possible iteration from the start, from the ideation process. So the end result, maximum fun and less time wasted on the game development process. So now what I'm going to start with is I already started making some squares. These are the squares I'm going to sketch in. I'm going to start with 6, and in case we need more, I'm just going to draw more. I'm working currently on Procreate. You can work on any sort of app that allows you to sketch out ideas. You can even sketch on paper, whichever is most convenient for you. I just am doing this on my on Procreate because I have it on my iPad, so that just works easier for me. Now, typically, from a film directing perspective, you want to label all of your of what I would call screens. So this should be screen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, when you have your screens laid out, you will typically start with your first screen, which is this one, number 1 now, as an establishing shot. Now, that's not a given, but it's how I personally like to start my stories, just because it sets the place of your story. So you have different types of shots that set the location and essentially the angling of your scene. And one of them is our establishing shot. So we have our establishing shot, also known as just EST. And this is like a large overview. Essentially a large overview of your location. Now, excuse my really horrible handwriting. I will try to read out everything that I'm saying while I'm writing, just so I'm not confusing anyone. But you start with that, and you can start with other things such as a medium shot, which is also simplified to MS. A medium shot is typically just going to show the characters from I would say mid-thigh up view of characters and scene. It's very self-explanatory to an extent. So even if you don't have a character in that scene, it's kind of like how you toggle on your phone and you have 0.5x, 1x, and 2x. This would be like 1x, so the middle option. Because then you have CS, which is close up, literally close up. So it would look something like just the face in the shot. And if you want to get even closer, it's called ECU, extreme close up. So even closer than close up. So if you had the face in one shot, that would be the close up. If you had just the eyes, that would be closer than close up. That would be an extreme close up. I'm not gonna go through all of them. I'm just gonna go through, I guess, one more, wide shot, which is also known as WS. And this is gonna show, if you have a character in the screen, it's gonna show your entire character's body in the frame of the scene. So let's just say entire character. Oops. Let me write that a bit clearer. Entire, I'm not gonna write character, I'm just gonna say char for short. So these are the typical scene layouts for framing your characters in a shot, or even framing like views. And even when you're doing this, you also have to keep in mind the 1/3 rule. If you don't know, the 1/3 rule essentially breaks each component of a shot into thirds, and you want to make sure, like, if 1/3 is empty, the other third isn't. It starts to get very specific and a bit. It's almost a study of its own. So I would highly recommend researching into that as well, because I'm just giving a general overview of what that is and how we're going to be using that. But these are just some of the layouts of a shot that I'm going to be using in this storyboard layout. There's so many more, but these are the main ones I'm going to focus on today. So how you start with your labeling your scenes. I'm going to do this in a different color just so it's clear for everyone. What color should we do? Let's do blue, I guess. Oh no, blue does not show. Let's do this. So I'm gonna label, let's start with number 1. You're gonna label, first of all, if it's exterior shot or if it's interior. Since this is gonna be an establishing shot, establishing shots are usually like very wide viewed, so it's typically gonna be exterior. So I'm gonna start with EST for establishing. And then you wanna say whether it's daytime or nighttime. So the story we're going to start with today will be about, let's say, our Kuthban race driver. So let's say we are actually going to make our cinematic intro. Our cinematic intro will be about our race driver in the UAE doing the rally track that we're building in Kuthban. So I want to make it daytime. So then I just put day. Then you want to put some reference to the location. So I'm going to start with the location of, let's say, city location. So you start with the type of shot, the time of day, and city. It can get much more specific than this, but for the sake of showing you an overview of the storyboarding process. That's what I'm going to include. Typically, also you'll see lines similar to how a comic is written that it quite literally explains what's happening in this shot that you're going to be sketching out. But for now, I'm going to just talk through it, so I'm going to skip the lines. And you want to learn how to be quick in this process as well, because not all the time are you going to have a client that's going to tell you beforehand what the story is. You could be in a meeting room with your clients and your development team, and you'd be the one coming up with the story, so you'd have to sketch on spot what's happening. So your sketches don't need to be perfect. They can be stick figures, they can be high quality characters, whatever you feel comfortable doing and whatever looks clear, I guess, to even other like viewers that are going to look at your sketches. And yeah, whatever can be done iteratively, because you want to keep iterating on the process. And I keep mentioning this a lot in all of our streams, because developing a game is a very, very, very iterative process. Yeah, you can quote me on that. Iterative, Shama. So establishing the city. So establishing, it's going to be farther, right? So let's have some buildings. There are some buildings. Then you have more. These look like perfume bottles, but you know what? Whatever works. Whatever works at this point. I'm not typically good at fast sketching, which is why our art lead Omer usually takes my horrible sketches and then turns them into prettier ones. But for the sake of explaining what's happening today in storyboarding, I will embarrass myself by showing you how bad my drawing skills truly are. But as I mentioned, you really don't need to be amazing at this process. Another building. So just windows. It's already kind of clear what's happening with these are buildings, and you can sort of see as a city layout. Let me add more windows. Windows always makes cities look like a city. So yeah, kind of sort of see our city layout. That's our establishing shot. It's daytime, so we have some clouds going on. Now we move to our second shot. Our second shot, I want to introduce our character right away, because we just have one character, our star of the show. So let's start introducing them and giving them a reason of existence. So let's start with this type of shot. I want this to be a medium shot. Oops. Sorry guys, I'm seeming to have a bit of a disconnect between my pen and the iPad screen, but let's see now. Okay, I guess it's not gonna work, so I'm gonna move with using my finger for the rest of this. I hope it works out fine. We will see. Yeah. I'll continue with using my finger just because. Nope, not working. No worries. It's still simple enough to do. So this is going to be a medium shot, and it's still daytime. Nothing happened for time of day to change. And now it's not in the city, it's in a building. I want my character to start off in the building. Sorry for my horrible handwriting. It's getting even progressively worse because I have to resort to using my hand to draw, but no worries. I want to have our character be here on the left, filling this third of the screen. So just from this, you can tell it's a character. Like, it's horrible, but it's a character. And they will be having a conversation with the manager who's over here, talking to them even closer. And the backdrop will be more views of the city. There's, let's say, a round table in the back. And let's put like a plant pot over here, because why not? You know, you're in an office. Why not have some plants there? Just to set the scene of the location. This is where the wall divides, essentially. And yeah, so you have the manager talking to our main character. Another thing you would also do in this scene is if the camera is not still, you want to describe the camera movement. So I kind of want the camera to pan. So what I would do is that I would draw a little camera icon. Actually, this color is not that visible. Let me do it in dark blue. Little camera icon. And I would say pan. And you say the direction of the pan. So it would go from this side of the screen, this left side, this right side to the left side. And what's happening in this scene, which is what I would describe in the lines below, but I'm not writing them out now, similar to essentially these lines. Here I would have manager conversing with our rally driver, telling them about a new race that they want them to debut in. And this is going to be our Kuthban race. Then we're going to have, going back to our palette, so I can start sketching out, we have our third frame. I'm going to have a close-up, also day. This time I want it in the car, in the rally car. So before close-up, you'd also state that it's INT for interior. It's a bit messy now, but as long as you have the basis of your story down, you can hand it off to people who are much, much better in drawing to clean it up. But the important part of having your story noted down is the main part of this process. So now I have interior, close-up day, car. I want our driver to be here in the center. Actually, they need to be a bit bigger than this. This is our driver. You can see their face. Let's say they're wearing a helmet. So everything here is kind of shaded out. So our driver is wearing this helmet. Now the sketching process is going a bit slower, just because I'm trying to get the point across of what's supposed to be happening. But now you have our driver over here. This does not look right at all, but let's say this is our character wearing a helmet, and now they're in a car, so there's a wheel over here. And you see the interior of the car. Let's see, hand grips over here, the chair, and the rear view mirror somewhere up here. And yeah, you just start to get a sense of what's in the car, the interior of the car. And let's see, put the sort of like the hand railings. And yeah, clean this up a bit. Now I'm immediately jumping to the scene of our character driving in a car. So we set what we did now, we set the location, we set the time of day, and we set the framing of the shot. So it immediately goes from meeting room directly to them being on track. I'm cutting like very aggressively from being in a meeting room to in track, because remember our story is about a rally game. So I want something that's fast paced. So our cinematic intro, I would want it to feel fast paced as well, so it can match the theme of the game, which is the faster you go, the better. And it sort of just sets the mood of the game as well. And that's something you want to keep in mind when you're doing your storyboarding for your game. Even if you're making a cinematic intro or not, it has to still follow the same sort of pace that you've set in your game. So they're in the car, and I wanted to cut again now. Let me erase, or actually let me write below it. Now I want it to be exterior, and I want to show some of the imagery that you're gonna kind of start to see in the game. So now I want our driver to be looking out the front window to see the scenery that we're building in our game, to see the skyscrapers and to see the old architecture, which are all going to be in low poly. So pretty exciting, but yeah, they're looking at the view. So it's going to be exterior. I want it to still be day. And now I want them to be looking at old town. So we have a sort of bazaar section going on in our rally track, which is going to represent the Burda Bay area, so the more heritage parts of the UAE. So this is all going to be seen directly. So I'd have our old bazaars. So old bazaars, I'm going to put like some satellite dishes on top of the building, because those are very, very common in the old areas. And they're more closer to the ground, the buildings, and they have like very interesting long pillars. So let me do that. Very small entrances typically. Because remember, these are all old buildings. And then we have some water. And you see a lot of seagulls and birds flying around in this area. So kind of setting the mood for that. So yeah, that's what our driver is going to be seeing in this scene. Now I kind of want the scene to come back and slow down a bit. So I'm going to move this inside. So this is going to be interior. Again, still day. And now it's going to be back to the car again. When you're switching between interior and exterior, you want to make sure you're switching at a pace that represents what you want to show. So now I want to focus on the beauty of the scenery. So I want it to come back indoors and slow down again. So when our character is looking out, things feel fast. But when they're looking from the inside out, so the camera's inside the car, I want it to slow down a bit. Let's include a sun here too, just because I like including suns. Also because it's daytime. So now I'm gonna have the window. Wait, let me fix this. It's a bit of a crappy window. Yep. This is the front window of the car. I also want to note that this is going to be from first person perspective. So I'll just do POV for point of view. And in the lines, I've described that looking at the scenery of from within the car from point of view of our character. And here we're going to have the wheel of the car, some hand grips. Yeah. And then I want to have the scenery again. So the same sort of scenery. That I drew earlier, but now it's being viewed from an interior. So yeah, now you kind of get that scenery over there, and I want this to be a pan again. But instead of it being a pan from left to right, or actually no, since I already had it be a pan in our second frame, I'm gonna have this be a trolley in. So what a trolley in or a dolly in is when you move inwards or outwards on typically a straight linear path. The reason it's called a dolly in is because the camera is placed on film sets. The camera is placed on something that kind of looks like train tracks, and it pushes the camera forward or backwards. So it's not a zoom. It looks similar, but it has a much more mesmerizing effect in that it actually takes you in and takes you back out. So I'm gonna make this a dolly in. So I would set the camera over here, and I'd say dolly in. You can also explain this in the lines that you have below the scene. But yeah, it would be a dolly in, and I didn't draw my character because remember I said it is a point of view. And now let's say our final scene, our cut scene. Typically, I would not make the final scene at just the 6th frame, but keeping in mind of the time for today's stream, I want to draw out the final, let's say, finish line segment. So this is going to be exterior, and this is going to be day, and now I want it to be a wide shot, WS. If you remember from earlier when I mentioned what each shot is, this is a wide shot. So now I want to have all our characters standing at a finish line. Let me start with the horizon because it's a wide shot, so I want to lay out sort of where everything is. And here we have Kuthban. Kuthban Rally. That says Kuthban Rally. And then you have, I'll do all the cars. Really horrible cars. Our cars don't look like this. Our cars look much better. But for the sake of this sketch, we have all our cars parked now. So you kind of get to see like some of the glamour of the rally races, and in the distance you get to see some of the skyscrapers over here, and then here you get to see some of the bazaars, and then over here you get to see some of the water, and we have another character over here closer to the camera, and our first character, same character as earlier, you would typically label them, and let's say this character is handing our driver, which is going to be you in the game, a trophy. And then we have our driver receiving the trophy, and this would be our ending scene. And that would be sort of what we would make into, or roughly, I guess, is what we would make into our cinematic intro. Typically, I would want to make the story a bit with much more frames, but keep in mind, much more frames does not essentially mean your film is going to be longer. It's just that since our game is fast-paced, I'd want our cinematic intro to be fast-paced, and therefore that would require much more cuts, therefore much more frames to sketch out. And if I wanted to get even more specific as to how the camera moves, how the characters are standing in relation to the screen, I would list out in much more detail in lines what's happening. And then I would give this to our lead designer, which is Omer, to resketch them to bring the images to life. I would explain it to them on a one-on-one meeting, and then from there on, we would give it to an animator who would animate our frames that are literally sketched out. And then we go through the process again to make sure each scene looks the same and that they have all the details that they would need of the camera movements to animate our storyboard. And from the storyboard, even if we didn't make this cinematic intro, we have an idea now of what we want to have in our rally track and what the user would want to enjoy seeing, such as the skyscraper, such as the ocean view, whatever it may be. It takes you through the story of the game, and it takes you through the feeling that you would get going through the rally. And it cuts down what we wouldn't want to view or what we would want to view if we actually were the rally racers driving around our track. And that would be the conclusion of the importance of storyboarding for games. Even if you are making a cinematic intro, even if you aren't, it will always be a part of the process, whether it is seen in the final product or not. It will always be felt. So pay much attention to the storyboarding. And that brings us to the end of today's stream. Thank you so much for listening and for joining us. Stay tuned for tomorrow's stream with Omer, where we're going to do more illustrations on Procreate. And yeah, thank you so much, guys.